Okay, perfect. All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me tonight. Hopefully, we're on the right place. Master Your Metabolism Masterclass. So, my name is Mia. I know a lot of you know me from social media and have kind of trickled through there. I'll introduce myself in a moment here. But the purpose behind doing this workshop tonight is I the challenge that I've been seeing coming up over and over, and I've seen happen over the past decade in my career, is just there's a lot of confusion around the things that mostly contribute to our metabolism and the big drivers when it comes to weight loss. And what I wanted to look at is to look at our metabolism from a more holistic perspective. So I think whenever we're on a weight loss journey, we tend to get stuck on that kind of the calories in, calories out, and only focusing on that. But there's so much more to the picture, which we're going to dive into today. So I'm going to budget probably around an hour, and then we'll have some time at the end if you have any questions. If there are questions while we're going through feel free to pop it into the chat. I'm happy to answer them there too. Okay, so tonight we'll be covering lots of goodies here. So main things are going to be the contributing factors to weight, and we're going to be talking about blood sugar. We're going to be talking about hormones, digestive health, inflammation, even medications that can also be contributing to us holding on to weight or influencing our metabolism. Give you some really key nutrition foundations that you can walk away for more sustainable weight loss solutions. We're going to be debunking some of the most common diets like intermittent fasting and keto and low carb, vegan diets, those sorts of things, and then talk about what the best strategy is for weight loss for the long-term gain. That's what we're looking for here. And then we're going to touch a little bit on the emotional and spiritual connection to weight at the same time. So all these different pieces. So just a little bit about me. So again, most of you probably know me already, but my name is Mia Schick. I just got married in the summer. My last name was Harris, but I changed it to Schick in the last couple of months. So still getting used to saying that. I've been in the holistic nutrition field for almost a decade now, which is kind of wild to say. I started in my mid-20s. I live in Saskatchewan right now. I'm originally from Victoria. I live in a very small town in Saskatchewan, and we have about, I think, 350 people. So it's been a little bit of an adjustment over the years. And one of the things that got me into nutrition and studying nutrition was I was really struggling in my mid 20s with mostly my relationship to food. I had probably gained and lost the same 10, 15, 20 pounds 3 or 4 times. And I got to this point where I was like, I cannot do this any longer. I was thinking about food all the time. I was hungry all the time. I was exhausted. My digestion was struggling. My hormones were an absolute disaster. And I kind of got to the point where enough was enough. And I wanted to have essentially a blueprint for just having better health. At that point, I kind of got to the point where I didn't really care about losing weight anymore. I wanted to focus on my health and learn nutrition and health in those perspectives, and not I kind of was done. I'm like, I don't care about losing weight anymore. I want to focus on some other things. And it was actually in doing that I came across some of the things that we're going to talk about today, and it was really a light bulb switch, and really shifted that mindset for me of just always being focused on calories and eating small amounts and over exercising to really looking at a bigger piece, or a bigger piece of the puzzle, which we're going to talk about a bit more today. So I currently, right now, so I have my own practice online. So my primary focus on women's health and hormones, gut health, and weight loss. I'm also a clinical instructor at Pacific Rim College. It's a college in BC. In Victoria, I teach online, and I teach some classes on business and also on emotional disordered eating, and I also do some clinics there as well. So I've done many things over the past decade. I've worked in naturopathic clinics, co-coached in programs, done recipe development, and so a lot of different things over the past 10 years. So my approach to weight loss, my three favorite words are: whatever you do to lose weight has to be enjoyable, maintainable, and sustainable. If you can't see yourself following a diet for the next year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, then I typically say we want to avoid it. That is going to be aside from maybe some more therapeutic protocols. There can be a time and a place for that, but if we're looking for a sustainable approach specifically for weight loss, we have to be playing the long term game. So I typically say if something promises you that you're going to lose a significant amount of weight in a month, 2 months, 3 months, probably want to turn the other way. It's a little bit tougher when we look at it at that point, right? It's very alluring to follow those really specific types of diets because we want those quick changes. And I understand it. A lot of times we're wanting to make those changes and feel better about ourselves and more confident. But we want to play the long-term game. It doesn't matter to me if somebody loses weight in 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. What matters to me is that it's that long term and that ideally we get to a place where it's just our lifestyle now and that we're not kind of constantly thinking about food. We really understand our body. We really understand food and we're able to kind of stay in this balanced place. I also don't believe that we need to cut out entire food groups or that we never ever have to have any fun foods ever again. I had a message not too long ago from someone that's like, how do I, eat some of these fun foods and still reach my weight loss goals? We'll talk about some of those strategies there. You definitely don't have to go in swearing off of wine or pizza, or we're heading into the holiday season, cookies and all those things are kind of abundant at this time of year. You can incorporate those things, and I actually think it's important to learn how to incorporate some of your favorite foods in a more mindful way. Never really works when we swear off those things. It's almost like our brain doesn't like when we take things away and then we start to kind of obsess over them a little bit. I'm also a believer that if we are on a weight loss journey, that it doesn't have to feel super hard. We shouldn't feel like we're thinking about food all the time, that we're hungry all the time, that we have to be overanalyzing everything that we're doing, or that we have to work really, really hard in the gym, kill ourselves in the gym, work out for hours a day. It just doesn't have to be that way. And I also think that we just don't need to use exercise while we're talking about it as a means to burn off or earn calories. I think exercise should be used for our mental and emotional health, for longevity, for building muscle mass, and just overall health, not necessarily utilizing that as a primary driver for weight loss. So before we kind of get into some of the lessons, I just want to really define what our metabolism actually is. So our metabolism is the collection of processes our body uses to turn the food that we consume into energy and then use that energy to keep us alive. So it's responsible for every single thing that we do, from breathing to digesting food to thinking, moving, to regulating our hormones, repairing tissue, fighting inflammation, and also regulates our temperature at the same time. So it's really important to have good, strong metabolic health. And unfortunately, where we're kind of at right now, especially in North America, a lot of people are struggling with their metabolic health. I think the last percentage I saw was around 93% of people have some type of metabolic issue. So I always say when we are looking at weight loss, it's like we have a giant puzzle in front of us, and there are many, many pieces to that puzzle. I want to kind of start shifting away from that. The only puzzle piece that we need to look at is that calorie piece. We'll talk about calories in a little bit here, but I think when we just focus on that too much, we're missing all of these other things. So some of the different things that can contribute to weight, hormones are going to be a big one. If there's anybody that is saying that hormones don't influence our weight, especially for women, we need to turn and look the other way, because they 100% do. And saying that they don't is just really comes down to lack of knowledge. Sometimes I see that in the fitness world, that sometimes like the only thing that matters is the calorie deficit, but our hormones do drive our metabolism. So we can't ignore that piece. We're going to break down each of these different kind of quote unquote hormonal imbalances and how it does influence our ability to store fat, burn fat, and also our hunger and our cravings at the same time. But a few hormone imbalances that can contribute to weight are both high and low estrogen, low testosterone levels, hypothyroidism and Hashimoto's, and also insulin resistance. So again, we're going to talk about each one of those a little bit further. Lack of sleep is actually a big one. So when we don't get enough sleep, so we a number of things happen here. So lack of sleep can lead to an increase in our cortisol levels the next day. So if we're not getting that kind of 7 to 8 hours per night, it can increase our stress hormones. It can influence our blood sugar levels the next day, but it also can really influence our hunger hormones. So our hunger hormones, leptin and ghrelin. So I know for me, if I have a bad sleep, sometimes the next day, I just kind of feel like I'm a bit of a bottomless pit and crave a lot of sugar. So sleep is really important. Stress, we're also going to dive into this piece a little bit further, the cortisol connection as well. Nutrient deficiencies. So I think sometimes the problem that we have is we don't have lack of calories. We typically have a diet that has an abundance of calories and even macros, the big ones being protein, carbs, and fats. But we're not getting a lot of food that has a lot of nutrients in it. So unfortunately, a lot of us we're well fed in a sense, but we're nutrient deficient on another level. And so when we are nutrient deficient, our brain still is going to tell us like, hey, we're lacking these nutrients. It's either going to turn on cravings for specific foods that contain those nutrients, or will tell us to go out and continue to look for food until we top up those nutrient stores. Gut issues are another one. So a lot of our hormones that can influence our blood sugar, our hunger as well, and also our metabolism. The gut microbiome can helps to regulate our blood sugar at the same time. We'll talk about that piece a little bit more. Inflammation can be another one. So inflammation kind of ties into the stress piece there. So when we're inflamed in our body, it increases our cortisol levels and then just has a ripple effect on other things like our blood sugar. Certain medications, we'll talk about that a little bit further. Blood sugar imbalances, we'll talk about that a little bit further. And of course, it could be just as simple as just excessive calories, just eating too much. But also our more emotional connection to food there too. So there's lots of working pieces. And I really think that if we're looking at making changes in our diet or in our health, we have to be kind of looking at it and taking all of these different things into consideration. Mhm. Pardon me. So as I mentioned, I'm not a big fan of dieting. So what happens, and so this can be different things, either maybe cutting our calories down too low and eating too small, just not eating enough in general, or it could be maybe we are choosing to do a specific diet at the same time. What happens usually, so just to give you an idea of what happens, is if we are cutting our calories down too low, so let's say maybe typically you eat around 2,000 calories and then all of a sudden we go down to eating 1,200 calories. The thing that happens, it's called metabolic adaptation. So the body gets very, very smart when it starts to detect that, we were eating 2,000 calories before, all of a sudden we're eating 1,200 calories. The brain goes, okay, according to my calculations, if we keep going at this pace, we're going to burn through our backup stores, aka our fat reserves. So we don't want to do that. If we're burning 2,000 calories but only taking in 1,200 calories, we're going to be in trouble if we keep this up. So what happens is that the body starts to down regulate things. So it actually slows down our metabolic rate. So it can influence our thyroid, which is a big driver in our metabolic health. It can also kind of get strategic about where it wants to delegate those calories and those nutrients at the same time. So if they're not getting in enough, if the body's not getting in enough nutrients, it's going to go, okay, we got to be smart here and prioritize the things that are the most important. So other things like maybe your hair might thin a little bit, maybe your nails aren't quite as strong, your skin might not be as glowy as it used to be, because the body's like, those things aren't necessarily for our survival. In some cases, even severe cases, if we are really undernourishing, combined especially with overexercising, then we can even lose our period. So that really says that the body just doesn't feel safe in order to reproduce. So that's not overly conducive. So then we have that down-regulated metabolism. And then oftentimes too, if we are in that for a long time, or if we have lost a significant amount of weight quite quickly, then we can also lose our muscle mass at the same time. And muscle is really, really important for our overall metabolic health. It helps to sop up excess glucose, just really important. We don't want to not have good muscle, especially as we get older as women. So now we have less muscle. our metabolism has downgraded. And then the other thing that happens is because the body wants you to go out and look for food, it's going to skyrocket your hunger hormones. So you are going to be thinking about food all day long. That's going to take up a lot of brain space. We kind of sometimes will hear that in the online world, the food noise, right? Constantly kind of thinking about our next meal, what we're going to be doing next, eating next. And it's just, it takes up a lot of brain space. That's the other thing too. If we go a little bit too far, it just takes up too much brain space. And that could be used in many better ways than always worrying about our diet. So slow down metabolism, our muscles decrease. Now our hunger hormones have skyrocketed, and it basically makes sticking to that diet nearly impossible, right? And then it gets really hard. Our hunger's out of control, our cravings are out of control, and then we just end up going back to what we did before. And we just kind of end up on this hamster wheel over and over and over again. And like I mentioned, that was me. I probably gained and lost the 10, 15, 20 pounds like 4 or 5 times. And it was that last time where I'm like, okay, we got to have a different approach here because this isn't working. Other thing too is if we are undernourishing and over exercising, coupled with over exercising, and that's what I see pretty frequently in the weight loss world, is that whole scenario is very, very stressful, and sometimes it can actually have the reverse effect, and in some cases cause people to actually hold on to weight almost as a protective mechanism. The last piece is that it doesn't address the emotional connection to food. So if you are somebody that's struggling with binge eating or emotional eating, just following a specific diet or a meal plan or just trying to keep in with a certain calorie amount isn't looking at the whole picture, and those issues are still going to be there. So really, really important to look at our emotional connection to food. Otherwise, again, we're missing that big piece of the puzzle. Okay, so we'll touch a little bit on the calories in versus calories out. So, a calorie deficit is a primary driver for weight loss. And a calorie deficit just essentially means that on a typical day, we're burning more calories than we're taking in. And so that can come from just our daily functions. You know, the body burns quite a few calories just by breathing and walking around and, looking at things in the cupboard and sitting at our desk and working. We still burn calories doing that. And then you add on exercise, and that adds on more there. So the idea is that we rely on our fat stores to kind of make up for that. But again, only focusing on calories just leaves a lot of people feeling really, really stuck and just looks at a really, really small piece of that puzzle. Other thing is a calorie, it just isn't a calorie. So if we take different types of foods, let's say you take 100 calories of chicken, 100 calories of broccoli, 100 calories of, let's say, gummy bears, all different types of foods, they all have different macros basically to them. So the chicken's going to be primarily protein. The broccoli is there's maybe going to be a little bit of carbs in there, but a lot of fiber. And then the gummy bears are going to be mostly glucose or sugar, right? And our bodies metabolizes all of those different nutrients very, very differently. So it's hard to just be stuck on that, just the calories in versus calories out, because there's so much more to the picture. The other thing is to be in a deficit, you don't have to do anything extreme. 300 to 400 calories per day is probably the sweet spot that you want to aim for that sustainability. That's going to yield you roughly about 1.5 pounds per week, which is a nice, slow, and steady pace that we want to aim for. One of the things is that I think just that we talked about on this other page here, all these different things, the hormones, sleep, stress, nutrient deficiencies. When we focus on these things rather than just focusing on calories, it actually makes being in a calorie deficit much easier to stick to. So if we're eating foods that are more whole foods, that are nutrient dense, that help support our blood sugar levels, we control our appetite better, and also our cravings. And those usually are the things that are driving us in and out of these different diet protocols. Okay, so hormone imbalances that contribute to weight gain. We'll break each one of these down a little bit more here. So insulin resistance is probably one that I see pretty frequently in my practice. So insulin resistance means that the glucose that we get from the food that we eat isn't able to get into our cells to be utilized as energy. So insulin's a hormone that's produced by the pancreas, and its job is to team up with a glucose molecule, and it comes up to our cells and it kind of knocks on the door and it goes, "Hey, cell, I have some glucose here for you for energy. Can I come in?" And it acts like a little key that lets that glucose into the cells to be utilized with energy. But with insulin resistance, that key to the door of the cell, it's just not letting that glucose in. The insulin sitting outside of that cell with the glucose molecule going, "Hello, like, can I come in?" And the cell's going, "No, you cannot." This can happen for many reasons. It does unfortunately happen for women as we get older. We do get a little bit more insulin resistant, which will kind of lead us into the next little bit here. So, this is what I see a lot with women kind of in the perimenopause, menopausal years, and they're going, "I'm doing all the same things I did in my 20s and my 30s. Now all of a sudden I'm putting on weight. What's going on?" It is because we're getting a little bit more insulin resistant, which actually ties into the decline in estrogen levels, which we'll get into a bit here. I also see insulin resistance with a lot of my clients that have polycystic ovarian syndrome. A lot of around 80% of women with PCOS have insulin resistance at the same time. Type 2 diabetes, too, insulin resistance is a primary driver. High and low. So both high estrogen and low estrogen can influence our weight. So high, usually I see high estrogen if somebody has been on birth control pills for a very, very long time. Typically, they're in more of a higher estrogen dominant state, just because of those synthetic hormones. And typically, kind of the signs of high estrogen, if somebody's experiencing a lot of like PMS symptoms, lots of breast tenderness, cramping, lots of changes in their mood, and that kind of signals to me that there's maybe some imbalances there. Same things with like fibroids and with PCOS. Kind of think of estrogen almost like as a growth hormone. So if we have things like cysts or fibroids, then sometimes it can be safe to say that estrogen levels are high. And then we have the flip side, which is low estrogen. This can happen in both women who are in their reproductive years, but also I see it most commonly in perimenopause and menopausal women where our estrogen levels are naturally declining. So estrogen plays a very delicate role with insulin. So again, insulin helps to regulate blood sugar. So whenever it's high or low, it can have a direct influence on how we're actually able to metabolize specifically glucose. So the interesting thing there, and when we're talking about the calorie piece, especially for women that are insulin resistant, perimenopause, menopausal years, that doesn't necessarily tell me that that person needs to go and just drastically cut their calories. That means they need to make sure their insulin or their cells are more insulin sensitive, not resistant. So we need to be doing things like manipulating our carbohydrates, eating more fiber, eating more protein, going for walks after our meals, doing some weight training, right? And so it doesn't necessarily mean we have to go in and just cut our calories. We should be doing some other strategies, which we'll get into a bit further. Low testosterone is another one. So testosterone, we kind of think of it as a male hormone, but women, we do need to have adequate testosterone levels. If your testosterone levels are low, you might feel very tired. Might have very low libido, low motivation. But testosterone is also needed to build muscle. So muscle again is a big driver in our metabolic health too. Thyroid imbalances, so hypothyroidism being a big one, so that is low thyroid function. Our thyroid is a little butterfly shaped gland that's kind of at the base of our neck, and responsible for lots of different things, our blood pressure, our temperature, and yes, how we metabolize our food. It also has a relationship with our menstrual cycle at the same time, so it has lots of jobs. But if our thyroid is sluggish, then we might have a hard time losing weight too. Leptin resistance. So leptin is a hunger hormone. So this is oftentimes I see coupled actually with insulin resistance. And so that could be similar to that food noise that we talked about, where someone's just thinking about food all the time and they don't have that same signal from their gut to the brain saying, "Hey brain, like I've had enough to eat, we're full, you can turn off our hunger hormones." That connection isn't there. So typically that person can tend to overeat in excess or feel quite hungry all the time. And then high cortisol, we're going to save this one for the next slide. It's a whole slide all on its own. Okay, so the cortisol connection. Cortisol, I feel like has been a pretty big buzzword over the last few years, and for good reason. I don't think we can necessarily just singularly blame cortisol for things like inflammation and weight gain and holding on to water. Yes, it can play a part, but again, there's lots of moving pieces, and it's just one of the pieces. But there's a lot of confusion, I think, around what cortisol actually is and how it works in the body. So it's not all bad. Cortisol is typically known as our stress hormone, but I also like to think of it as our awake hormone, our hormone that gets us motivated. When you open your eyes in the morning, that is actually cortisol starting to rise and wake you up to get you going in the day. So get you up in the morning, get you feeling motivated. It's just when cortisol is in excess is where you run into issues. So if you are somebody that fairly high stress person, maybe not sleeping very well, maybe not eating very well, maybe have hormonal issues, um, blood sugar dysregulation. There are a lot of different layers when it comes to stress. And so for most people, it's a combination. It's not just stress that's going on in our life with family or kids or work or whatever it might be. It's all these other different layers in there as well. And when it comes to weight loss, or when it comes to the connection with weight, what happens is when our cortisol levels are elevated. So that typically happens if our body, senses something in our environment that, maybe we should be aware of that might be influencing our survival, rings the alarm bell, right? So cortisol levels increase. And then what it does is it tells the liver. So the liver stores glycogen, so sugar. It tells the liver, hey, you got to release some of that sugar into the system so that we have energy to run or fight whatever is stressing us out in that moment. And so then we get this surge of sugar into our system for that energy. And most of the time we're actually not running or fighting anything. Maybe we're sitting at our desk and there's a deadline, or maybe we're stressing about an exam that's coming up, or whatever it might be, and we're actually not burning off that sugar. So what happens is that excess glucose in our bloodstream ends up getting stored as weight. Then you kind of get on these wild blood sugar fluctuations, increases cravings, specifically for carbohydrates, also increases cravings for things like salty foods. So if anybody tells me that they crave a lot of salt, I always bring up the conversation around stress of cortisol, because our adrenals use a lot of sodium to produce cortisol. So um, but as I mentioned, stress can come from a lot of things. Blood sugar imbalances, which we're going to talk about. So if our blood sugar goes too high, then dips too low, that can create a cortisol response. If we're over exercising, doing too much exercise, doing too much cardio, we're doing HIIT workouts all the time, that can be quite stressful on the body. If we're really inflamed, maybe we're drinking too much caffeine, too much alcohol, chronic cannabis use can influence our cortisol levels. And then not eating enough, as we mentioned in the beginning. So if we're not consuming enough calories, our body does see that as a big stressor. So kind of the overall foundations of metabolic and hormone health, these are the three pillars that I really work with people on, typically over a 4-month pillar. We're going to delve into the blood sugar piece a little bit further, because it's so important for not necessarily just our metabolic health, but for our hormone health, for our energy, for our mood. If you're somebody that struggles with anxiety or ADHD, you have to nail our blood sugar. And I really believe that if we hone in on this and we master this, then just so many things in our life can get better in regards to our health. The other piece is our gut and our liver. So lots of hormones are metabolized in the gut. Our thyroid hormones are metabolized in the gut. Estrogen's metabolized in the gut. A lot of our hunger hormones are in the gut as well. Our liver can play a role too. And then also that stress and cortisol regulation. So those are kind of the three foundations that I always come back to, almost no matter what the client in front of me is struggling with. I did just want to highlight that there are some medications that can influence our weight, just to be aware of. So SSRIs can be a big one. So antidepressant and anxiety medications. Sometimes what happens with those is that I find sometimes people either have two sides of it, where they maybe if they are stressed or anxious, then it can influence their hunger hormones, and then taking these can increase hunger, which isn't always a bad thing. But it also can tie into, we talked about insulin being a big driver with how we store weight too. It can also influence that. Birth control, we touched on this a little bit, but mainly the thing that I see with birth control, specifically the pills, is that it can increase estrogen levels and decrease testosterone. So weight gain can be a side effect of birth control for sure. Steroids, another one. A lot of it comes back to the blood sugar, diabetes medication, specifically insulin, and then beta blockers for hypertension. The main one around that is that it just can make people feel a little bit tired and sluggish and maybe unmotivated to exercise. Nutrient deficiencies are a big one. So a lot of nutrients do drive our overall metabolic health. So as I kind of mentioned in the beginning, if we have a low nutrient diet, then the appetite center of the brain can trigger a more ravenous appetite and uncontrollable cravings. So really important to get lots of different types of nutrients, color into the diet, different types of plant foods specifically. Low vitamin D. So vitamin D, if you are living in Canada, you have to take vitamin D. It's just imperative. It's kind of a no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to take vitamin D. We just don't get enough of it in the winter here in Canada, unfortunately. And it's a big driver in our hormone health, metabolic health, energy, and mood. So really, really important to look after that one. Magnesium is another one. Most people are deficient in magnesium, unfortunately. Me. Usually it comes from our soil, but a lot of our soil is depleted in nutrients. So a magnesium supplement could be helpful. B vitamins help with energy production, and also iodine and selenium deficiencies, which directly are linked to thyroid dysfunction. So a couple supplements that I did just want to highlight. I will afterwards, once I send the recording out, I'll send some links. I have an online shop that I have linked some of these supplements in there. I do just want to say that by no means am I saying that everybody should take every single one of these, and supplements will definitely not take place of making changes in our diet and lifestyle, but they can do exactly what they say, be a supplement for some of those things. We already talked about the vitamin D and K2. The magnesium bisglycinate is the one that I typically like. It's all really great for the nervous system. I usually like to take that one before bed to get into a deeper sleep. Inositol can be a very helpful supplement for those struggling with PCOS and insulin resistance. Inositol is actually a B vitamin that helps our cells uptake that glucose, similar actually to berberine. Berberine was kind of touted last couple of years as like nature's Ozempic. It does similar things, and again, just helps to regulate our blood sugar, regulate our insulin levels at the same time. Berberine sometimes I've used with my ladies who kind of are in perimenopause, menopausal years. I would just be careful with berberine because it is an antimicrobial, so it can actually deplete your good bacteria in your gut. So you have to kind of pulse that one on and off. Glutamine is another one. Glutamine is actually amino acid. I usually will use that like in a lot of my gut healing protocols. It's really great for strengthening the lining of the gut, but it's also very good for regulating the appetite and controlling blood sugar levels. Usually in powder form. I like to take it first thing in the morning on an empty stomach in a glass of water. Chromium is another one, so a mineral that just helps again with blood glucose levels. Some supplements actually have combinations of these different things in there, and more so kind of promoted as support for healthy blood glucose levels. Last one is protein powder. So obviously we want to be getting enough protein in through our diet, but whey protein specifically, plant protein is okay, but whey protein specifically can actually enhance the production of GLP-1. So we've all heard probably about Ozempic, right? We actually naturally produce that that hormone in the body, in the gut, and it can get produced more if we eating certain foods that are higher in protein. Whey protein powder specifically can further influence that, so you feel fuller for longer by taking it. Also, just good for overall muscle support, especially if you're exercising or just wanting to maintain that muscle. Hmm. So I did want to just touch a little bit on gut health, inflammation, and the connection to weight. So obviously our gut plays a major role in digestion, our fat storage, and our hunger. hormones. So we just talked about one of them, GLP-1. Glucagon-like peptide 1 is a hormone that's produced in the gut. And so it gets produced in higher amounts in foods that are higher in protein, fiber, and fat. So we'll talk about that a little bit further. But if we don't have a good balance and a proper balance of beneficial bacteria specifically, then that can influence our hunger hormones and also our blood sugar at the same time. So our gut can get compromised due to things like stress. Stress is actually a really big one. Stress can deplete our stomach acid. It can slow down motility. Obviously, if we have a poor diet, we're not getting inadequate nutrients, not eating enough fiber, vegetables. Chronic antibiotic use, so usually antibiotics, they don't just target the one specific strain of bacteria that we're wanting to get out. It gets rid of all of it. So it can have a really big influence on the gut. So if you're somebody that is taking a lot of antibiotics, and you want to do some gut healing, certain medications, food allergies, and things like excessive caffeine and alcohol. So just what we talked about before, if we're not able to digest and absorb our nutrients, then our body will still want more food. So it's one thing to eat our food, but we need to make sure we're digesting it and breaking it down and absorbing it properly. So we want to have a nice fiery digestive system. We talked about the last two pieces, the hormones that are produced in the gut that tell the brain that we're full, and also inflammation. So if you have a lot of inflammation in the gut, that directly influences cortisol levels, which can influence our blood sugar and influence our weight and our hunger and our cravings. So what's the formula for a balanced weight? So combination of different things. Blood sugar, we're going to talk about this a little bit further and what to think about when you're building out your meals. Having a well-rounded, nutrient-dense, rich diet, a regulated nervous system, getting good sleep, exercise. I really think with exercise, it's about working out smarter, not harder. Sometimes on a weight loss journey, if we're really over exercising, if you're doing things like a lot of running, again, a lot of those HIIT workouts, working out every single day can really increase your appetite, which is fine. But then sometimes it can make it harder to stick into that calorie deficit that we talked about at the beginning. So sometimes kind of pulling back a little bit and being more strategic around your training, doing things like strength training and walking specifically after meals can be really beneficial. I'm actually a really big fan of walking for a number of different reasons. If we walk after a meal, it can actually lower your glucose levels by 30%, which is pretty wild. So what happens there is your muscles are just kind of soaking up that excess glucose once you're in movement. So really good idea if you are somebody that struggles with blood sugar issues or insulin resistance, go for walks after meals. It's a really simple thing that you can do. Other thing, if you're going at a brisk pace, walking actually burns fat versus burning our glucose. Usually the body for energy likes to burn glucose, but when we go for walks, you actually burn fat, especially if you're doing more of like a steady slate, just slow pace, not something not like super out of breath, a little bit out of breath is okay. But so you have that. It also increases serotonin or dopamine too. So neurotransmitters that help with mental and emotional health, and also lowers cortisol. So walking, especially done outside in a green environment, seeing green lowers our stress hormones. So further helping with our hormone health and just regulating our blood sugar and our appetite. And then addressing emotions without food. So again, if you are somebody who is an emotional eater or a binge eater, that really, really has to be something that is addressed. So again, we can have the perfect diet and follow that for a certain period of time. But if we're not looking at maybe why we're leaning on food or utilizing food as a form of support, sometimes it can be from low dopamine. Sometimes people with things like ADHD really struggle with binge eating or compulsive eating too. So important to kind of explore those things a little bit further. And then, of course, having a healthy gut and happy hormones at the same time. Okay, so the next piece, I just want to hone in a little bit more on blood sugar balancing and why it's so important. So ideally, we kind of want to avoid this over here. I call this the blood sugar roller coaster. So I'm going to fast forward a little bit here to this slide. And this is kind of what we want to avoid. So these big peaks and valleys when it comes to our blood sugar. So I'll give you a couple of examples of what kind of a blood sugar spike might look like, and then a blood sugar drop and why we want to avoid those. So a spike in blood sugar, usually that's typically going to come from consuming food that is primarily higher in carbohydrates. So for example, that could be, let's say you have your favorite holiday Starbucks drink in the morning on your way to work, or maybe you're grabbing a muffin, or maybe a piece of toast with some jam on it, or maybe you're having a bowl of oatmeal and cutting up some bananas on there with a little bit of milk. Not to label those inherently as bad, but the problem is those foods are primarily high in carbohydrates. So if we're eating carbohydrates and not combining them with protein and fiber and fat, what happens is they digest quite quickly, and then we get access to that energy almost all at once. Now, that would be totally fine if you are going to do a workout or go for a run. Even in those cases, you want to be careful about doing that all the time. But the problem is we don't want to really be doing that if we're driving our kids to school, or if we're going to sit down at our desks during the day. We don't need access to all that energy all at once. Because what happens is the body goes, cool, we have all of this glucose, all of this energy in our system, can't use it all right now. So what are we going to do? Okay, we'll use what we can right now. We're going to store some in our liver. So we've talked about how the liver stores glucose, our muscles store glucose. Okay, so what do we do with the rest of it? Guess what happens? It ends up getting stored as excess fat, especially around our midsection, right? So then now our blood sugar is all cleared up, and then we have that drop a couple hours later. So that can be that low blood sugar that can make people feel kind of brain fogged, maybe a little bit irritable, kind of hangry a little bit. We talked about if somebody's feeling very anxious, that can be from a blood sugar drop, because that triggers an alarm response too when our blood sugar is dropped too low. So that could either be from not eating enough at our past meal, not eating enough protein, not eating enough fiber. Maybe we've gone too long between meals at the same time, and our blood sugar is too low. The body goes, oh no, we're kind of like, we're in alarm phase here. Ring the alarm bells, ring cortisol to tell the liver to release that backup storage to bring that up. Oh, okay. Right. And then we just end up on this roller coaster all throughout the day, and it can make us very hungry, very irritable, and craving carbohydrates and sugar specifically. So really important. We want to avoid this blue line here, these big dips and drops. We want more so this green line here, like just a little bit of energy at a time. So we're kind of digesting our food, getting a bit of energy. Our body goes, oh, okay, we can use that. Okay, we got a little bit more, we can utilize that. So it's just more steady and prolonged rather than like, here's a bunch of energy all at once. Okay. And we'll talk about how to do this here on the next slide. So I did want to just go back to the calorie thing for a minute and just talk a little bit about tracking a bit. Sometimes it can be a beneficial strategy just to track what you are eating for a couple of weeks, just to see where you're at. You don't even necessarily have to aim for a specific calorie amount or protein or macro goals, but just to give you an idea of what you're consuming and what your meals look like, and if you're getting a balance of those macronutrients. It can be a really good learning opportunity if you don't know much about food in general. If you're not somebody that's aware of the caloric amount in foods, how much protein is in something, carbohydrates, those sorts of things, it can be worth it to just track for a little bit. It's a little bit of a pain in the butt, but again, it can be worth it. You just want to be careful just if you do struggle with your relationship to food, because sometimes it can bring up certain feelings around it. But I always say like that's just it's for educational purposes, right? So this is kind of when we're looking at balancing our meals out or building our meals out, this is ideally what I like most women to aim for. So we want to have a good amount of protein. So protein is so important for so many different things in the body. Our body doesn't actually like to utilize protein as energy because it's needed for so many other functions, for building muscle, for our hair, our skin, our nails, for producing digestive enzymes to break down our food, for repairing things in the body, for hormone health. It doesn't really like to use protein for energy. It will if we're not getting enough carbohydrates or if we have enough glucose, but it wants to use protein for other things. The other thing is protein is very, very satiating and filling. So if you're eating meals that have a lot of carbohydrates in them, it's very, very easy to overdo it, right? Typically, when we hear people like overeating, it's usually on the carbohydrate-rich foods, the candies, the chips, and pastries and things like that because they don't have the same influence on our hunger hormones as protein does. So protein, when we eat enough of it, the hormones in our gut tell the brain, hey, you know what? We got adequate nutrients here. We got enough protein. We're good. You can turn off those hunger hormones. We don't have to keep going out and eating or looking for food. So really, really important to feel full and satiated for supporting muscle mass. Really, really important to eat protein. So I say pick that as your first thing and then build out the rest of your meal around that protein source. Ideally, we want to aim for at the minimum 20 grams of protein, upwards of 40 at your main meals. Okay. Then we want half of our plate to be non-starchy veggies. So these are things like anything that is green, typically. So that's going to be like leafy greens, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts, asparagus, zucchini, um, celery, peppers, those sorts of things. They're very high in nutrients. We talked about color, having a lot of that. When something's very colorful, that tells me there's a lot of nutrients in it. So you're getting some micronutrients in there. They're very high in fiber and again, also very, very satiating. So like fill up on as much non-starchy veggies as you want. Then coming to our carbohydrates, you want kind of about a quarter of your plate or about a fist size, roughly, if you're on, if weight loss is your goal. This is going to depend, of course, on your activity level and some other things, but I say roughly around a third to a half of a cup of starch per meal. It's kind of a good place to start. Quarter of your plate, or yeah, kind of a fist size a portion of carbohydrates. And here, ideally, we want to be choosing carbohydrates that are higher in fiber. So things like rolled oats, brown rice, beans and quinoa, squashes, sweet potato, potatoes, those sorts of things. And then we want to have a little bit of good healthy fats in there. So this meal really helps to, again, keep you really full. What happens when we have protein, fat, and fiber, it slows down how fast the stomach is emptying, right? So you stay fuller for longer. So you're not going to feel hungry again in 2 hours. You can go 3, maybe upwards of 4 hours kind of in between your meals there. And yeah, you're kind of eating your meals and you're not thinking about food again, right? And it comes back to that, what we just talked about here. It just gives you that nice kind of balance with your blood sugar um, there too. So um, that's actually how those GLP-1 medications work, is it slows down how quickly the stomach is emptying, again, therefore making you feel fuller for longer. So you can actually do that through balancing your plate out properly and eating protein, fat, and fiber. A bonus on there is you can add some acidity to your meals. So especially things like vinegar can be really helpful for further delaying gastric emptying. It can also be good just because that acidity helps you to break your food down as well. So that could be like some apple cider vinegar. Maybe you make a dressing and have that over your salad, or maybe a squeeze of lemon over your meal too. So that acidity further helps with that blood sugar support. Just touching on how much protein you should be getting for the day. I'm being a little bit conservative here, you guys. 80 grams for women might be on the low end. I do feel like most women are probably that I see eating around 60 to 70. The actual recommendation for protein intake, if you are looking for weight loss support or maintaining or building muscle, is actually 1 gram of protein per ideal body weight. So let's say you are somebody that's 170 pounds, your goal weight is 140 pounds, you would eat 140 grams of protein, which for a lot of women that can feel like a lot. If you are not somebody that has been focusing on your protein, all of a sudden you're doubling it. And in some cases, that can actually cause you to overeat. Sometimes I've seen the reverse happen. Well, okay, I'm eating more protein for my weight loss journey, but I'm going way over my calories and getting a little bit stuck. So I think kind of the good place for women to aim for is like somewhere between 80 and 100 grams of protein and splitting that up, coming back to what we just talked about there, roughly 20 to 40 grams at your main meals. And then maybe you do around 10 to 15 at some of your stacks, and that's going to get you push that closer to that. Okay, so I won't go over this too much, but just to give you guys some rough ideas of what that protein looks like in that amount. So 3 eggs, 1 egg doesn't have a ton of protein in it. It's got about 6 grams. So I'm going to be eating a little bit more than just 2 eggs at breakfast. So 3 eggs is going to have around 18 grams, about 3/4 of a cup of cottage cheese or Greek yogurt. It's got around 20 grams. 4 ounces of chicken, steak, salmon, like tofu or tempeh, that's going to yield you anywhere. That's kind of looking at a palm size portion. That's going to roughly get you anywhere between 25 and 35 grams of protein. Okay. So if you're somebody that's like, I don't really want to track calories, but I want to kind of look at balancing my plate out and focus on protein, really easy, even just to throw it into chat GPT and just like, hey, give me a list of foods that have roughly around 20 to 30 grams of protein. Pick one of those for each of your meals, right? Um, Other things too is that just on the protein piece, if you're going to take one thing away from this, is to have a protein rich breakfast in the morning. That is probably one of the things that can make the biggest difference. Again, not just on for somebody on a weight loss journey, but for their mental and emotional health, for regulating anxiety, and also for ADHD. It's absolute game changer to have a high protein breakfast. What it does is it just sets the stage. If we come back to this kind of roller coaster here, it sets the stage for the day. So we're not kind of starting on this roller coaster. So to take anywhere, if there's anywhere you want to focus on that, start off with your breakfast, getting 20 to 30 grams minimum there, and then you can work on your other meals as you go. Okay, so just touching on exercise, talked about this a little bit already. We don't want too much or too little. So we don't want to do too much cardio or hit workouts that can really increase our cortisol levels. You can obviously, we want to incorporate some of these. There's lots of benefits to them. We just don't want to be doing them all the time. Strength training, really important, anywhere between 2 to 4 days a week. I kind of like 3 days as a sweet spot. I don't like working out every single day, and kind of breaking it up into a lower body, upper body, and then a full body day so that we're hitting all of those different muscle groups. Again, really, really important, not just for overall metabolic health, but for longevity. We want to support proper bone health, especially, and strength training can be really helpful for that. Walking, if we can, if you want to aim for those 10,000 steps per day, that's fine. But I would say for at least 30 to 60 minutes per day, and then getting some mobility in there. Okay, and then just touching on the emotional connection. So, foods, especially those that are higher in sugar and carbs and fats, they increase our dopamine levels in the brain. And eating that actually blunts that cortisol response. So, it's a very common thing to actually rely on food if we do have a stressful day. But the problem is if we're over relying on it. I think there's a big difference between like, I had a hard day and I came home and had dinner and, I wanted a scoop of ice cream afterwards. I don't think it's inherently bad to do that on occasion, but if we're doing it all the time, or if we're eating a whole pint of ice cream and then feeling bad and then going into restrictive mode, that's where it's like, okay, we need to be looking at those a little bit more. Other thing, just touching a little bit on trauma and abuse. So, past trauma and abuse can actually manifest in various coping mechanisms, including weight gain as a form of self-protection or emotional buffering. Can also, it's just kind of a blanket of protection, maybe in some cases to not be seen or to not get hurt. So, looking at it from that kind of psycho-spiritual connection. And so, yeah, some might unconsciously associate weight gain with safety or invisibility. So really important. It's interesting that sometimes when I work with them, and I think it's a good strategy too, is that either they'll start to go on making changes with their diet and nutrition, and then they add another layer and maybe working with a therapist to work on some of these deeper rooted issues. Okay. Just paying attention to time here, but just going over a couple of common diets and just debunking kind of the best versus maybe worse diets. Intermittent fasting, I've kind of changed my tune a little bit on it. Intermittent fasting can be a really beneficial tool, especially if somebody's struggling with things like insulin resistance. It can be very good for regulating blood sugar, but I would almost do it the opposite of what is typically recommended. Usually with intermittent fasting, you're skipping breakfast, not having anything until noon and then having a later meal at night. I would actually reverse that. So we talked about how protein, especially in the morning, can be super beneficial, very, very beneficial. There's tons of research on it. I would actually pull that window back, have a good high protein breakfast, and then pull that eating window back into the evening. That's actually a much more natural way of eating. At the same time, we don't need a ton of energy as we're winding down and going to sleep. And some people benefit from, not having a ton of food in their system when they go to bed, and helping them get better sleep too. So we don't want to go too long. I think, somewhere between 12 and 16 hours or fast, and then, 8 to 10 hours for our eating window can be good. Any sign of disordered eating, I would say no go. Obviously, if you're pregnant or breastfeeding, or if you're somebody that just has overall really high stress levels, then I would also avoid that at the same time. But it can be a helpful tool for insulin resistance, and in some cases, even digestive issues. So low carb keto diets, as I mentioned at the beginning, not a lot of people are maintaining these for the long term, and sometimes it can just create that like a negative context around carbohydrates or maybe feeling guilty if you're having carbs, especially again, holidays are coming up too. So other thing I do believe specifically for women, we do need to have carbohydrates in our diet for our mental health, emotional health, producing serotonin. It's really important for progesterone production and also for our thyroid too. So I typically don't recommend going really, really low carb here. Okay. Vegan diets, I don't know if anybody's going to be vegan, but I will say that my educated opinion on these diets is I just see too many women coming in with tons of nutrient deficiencies, especially with iron in their B12 levels. A lot of the times they have poor immune health, they have poor mental and emotional health, poor reproductive health. So I do believe that humans should have some good quality animal protein in their diet. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to eat it at every single meal every single day, but I do think having some quality animal protein in the diet is just conducive to overall health. And then the six smaller meals, should we be eating smaller meals or larger meals? I know in the kind of fitness world, it's kind of eat small amounts to rev that metabolism. I actually think, especially for things like insulin resistance, eating bigger meals is more beneficial. But sometimes what happens if we're eating or snacking all day long is one, we're just not full and satisfied after our meal. So we're thinking about our next meal again. Two, we're also increasing our blood sugar levels and our insulin levels too. So if we eat bigger meals spaced out 3, 4 hours, then it allows those that blood sugar levels to kind of come down a little bit, those insulin levels to come down in between those meals. So I'm kind of more of a eat bigger meals versus kind of being snacky all day long. So again, if you're eating meals that have enough protein, have enough fiber, have enough fat, then you should be able to go a little bit longer without constantly thinking about food or feeling hungry. That being said, I do think having kind of that bridge snack in between lunch and dinner can be really helpful, especially if you're having lunch at like noon and dinner's not until 5 or 6 o'clock. It's quite a long time between those, right? So having something in between can just help to keep you going through the afternoon, keep that blood sugar levels nice and stable, keep your energy up, and also prevent you from going into dinner feeling really, really hungry. That's a challenge that I see a lot of women coming in to see me with is that, they're going these long amounts in between meals and then they get to dinner and they're super hungry and then they tend to overeat. And then they still crave sugar later on in the afternoon. So in those cases, I'm like, you got to look at what's going on earlier in the day and make sure you're eating enough there. So, what is the best diet? So, the best diet really allows for some flexibility. I'm a big advocate for that kind of the 80/20 rule. So, eating whole foods that fuel us, make us feel good, support our hormones, our digestion, our mental, emotional health the majority of the time, and then allowing for some wiggle room, that 20% to enjoy foods, because we eat for so many other reasons than just for nourishment. We should primarily be doing that the majority of the time, but we eat for pleasure, for nostalgic reasons, for social reasons, right? So it's important to incorporate that and sprinkle that in into our diet at the same time. So whole foods, home cooked meals as much as we can, making sure we're balancing our meals out with protein and fiber and fat. And interestingly enough, the Mediterranean diet was actually voted the best diet of, it was actually 2023, 2024, and 2025. I don't know what it'll look like for 2026 coming up here too, but the Mediterranean diet voted best diet. Okay, just quickly here again, I'll make sure that I send the slide notes along with the recording afterwards. These are just an outline of some labs that you can potentially ask your doctor to run if you do feel like maybe you are struggling a little bit with your weight, and you feel like maybe you feel like you're doing the right things, but maybe something else is going on underneath that could be influencing that. So I always think it's a good idea to get some updated lab work minimum once every single year. You can check things like your blood sugar. So blood sugar and insulin, we want to look at both fasting glucose and fasting insulin. So that is what your blood sugar levels are doing first thing in the morning. Not having anything to eat, if our blood sugar levels are elevated, our insulin is elevated, then that can mean that our cells are a little bit insulin resistant. Ideally, our blood sugar should be low. So if it is elevated, then that means maybe we need some support from the metabolic side. Hemoglobin A1C is another one. So that's looking at the average of what your blood sugar levels have been doing over the past 3 months. So important to look at that guy. The other thing that I do want to say just when looking at labs is I look at labs from a functional perspective. It's one thing to just fall within range. If you're looking at the reference ranges for labs, it's really, really broad, right? It's a huge range. And so what I would do if you're looking kind of at your own is kind of find that midpoint range. Where's the midpoint? Where do you stand? Are you on the upper higher end, the lower end? And looking at from a more functional perspective. So it's just not good enough just to fall within range, because I can't tell you guys how many people or women that I've had come into my practice being like, oh, I had all this blood work done and everything came back fine. And then I take a look at it and I'm like, wow, we got some stuff that we got to work on here. This is not okay. And yeah, it really needs to be looked at. So the other one that you can check is a thyroid panel. Typically with doctors in Canada, they're only going to check your TSH levels, your thyroid stimulating hormone, the hormone from the brain to the thyroid, telling it either to pick it up or we got enough thyroid hormone circulating here. We don't want our TSH levels to be high. The ideal kind of range specifically for women is around 0.5 to 2.5. If we're starting to creep up in the threes or the fours, we really need to look at that. If you are struggling with other signs of potentially hypothyroidism, so if you maybe are feeling anxious or depressed, if you really low mood, if your hair is starting to thin, you are struggling with your weight, then it might be a good idea to push your doctor to check for a full thyroid panel and look at different markers like our T3 or T4 and any thyroid antibodies too. Usually they will only run a full thyroid panel if your TSH levels are elevated. So you kind of have to give a case for it if you want to run that. You could look at inflammation markers. So C-reactive protein would be one that you could look at. You could also look at your nutrient status. So we talked about vitamin D. That's another one that sometimes we have a challenge with getting doctors to run. They'll just tell you everybody needs to take vitamin D, but it can be a good indicator, especially if you haven't been supplementing. Just knowing where your vitamin D status is, then that can kind of determine maybe how much of a dose you need to take. Again, vitamin D really, really, really important, especially for metabolic health. B12 levels, another one. And then ferritin, looking at your iron levels. Iron is a big metabolic driver. So I will tell you guys, probably see low iron in about 9 out of the 10 women that I see. It's a big issue, and it's going to make you feel tired and unmotivated and depressed. And yeah, we need to be looking at our iron levels too. So ferritin is actually a protein that stores iron in the liver, so it can be a good indicator of where our iron levels are at. So just a few there. I'm not going to go into hormones too much. You could look at what your testosterone levels are doing if you feel like that's having an influence. You could look at your estrogen levels, but that's going to be really dependent on that specific person and what's going on for them and even where they're kind of at in their life too, right? So I didn't include um, hormones. Cortisol, you could get your cortisol levels checked in the morning. It doesn't really give you an good overview of what your overall cortisol levels are doing, just looking at one mark. Usually for cortisol, we want to check it at 4 points throughout the day. So when you wake up, mid-morning, mid-afternoon, and before you go to bed, and then we put it on a chart and kind of see what's called your cortisol curve. Is your cortisol levels rising and falling where they should? Are they maybe too high in the morning, low in the afternoon, making you feel really tired? Maybe they're high in the evening before you go to bed, giving you that kind of wired but tired feeling, mind racing a mile a minute, right? So if you get it with your doctor, they just look at it the morning. So just tracking progress. So as I mentioned in the beginning, slow and steady is going to win the race, right? So usually we want to aim somewhere for the sweet spot is usually around 1.5 to 2 pounds per week. I usually say that you don't necessarily have to jump on the scale every single day. You do want to keep track of this somewhere. If your goal is weight loss, I do think having goals in place and tracking them and measuring them makes a huge difference. So whether you do that through a specific app or not, or just record it somewhere in a journal, I think paying attention just helps just keep on track and motivated, and then allows you to go in and make tweaks where you need to, right? Don't necessarily, again, have to jump on the scale every single day. Pick a few times per week that you want to check in and weigh yourself. And don't stress. Like usually when we're looking at weight loss, it kind of, if we're charting it, it kind of goes down and then up and then up and then down and then down, and it kind of, as long as we're trending downward is what we want to aim for. So don't stress too much about if that number changes a little bit. And so many things can influence that. If you are somebody who is weight training, where you're at in your cycle can influence that, your carbohydrate intake, your bowel movements too. So we want to count some other wins at the same time. So I always think it's a really good idea to track your non-scale victories. So pay attention to other things in your health, like your energy, your mood, your relationship to food, those sorts of things. Really, really important to pay attention to that as well. We also talked about tracking more so for your calorie kind of amount too. That could also be utilized as a learning tool. You could use something like MyFitnessPal. I'll link another one. I'm not sure why the name um, Snap Calorie, I think, is the other one. We actually just take a picture of your food, and then it actually AI will kind of roughly estimate what's in your meal for you, and it can just kind of take the guesswork out of it a little bit too. So I'll include that when I send these notes out afterwards. Okay, just quickly here before we'll wrap up, just wanted to go over a bit of a case study. So this was a client that came to me a number of years ago. I see quite a few clients with PCOS. So she was really, really struggling. Like her biggest issues were weight gain. She had tried every single thing, every single diet. Her carbohydrate and sugar cravings were out of control, and she had a lot of acne coming in along the jawline and a lot of bloating happening, especially after eating fatty meals. What she said to me is, I feel like I look 6 months pregnant. Gut issues are very, very common, especially with people who have hormonal issues. Our hormones in our gut are very much intricately connected. So, especially with conditions like PCOS or endometriosis, need to be looking at our digestive health. She did work with a naturopath, and I also see this really commonly, who put her on a pretty strict diet to cut out gluten, dairy, soy, sugar, alcohol. And she did that for 3 months, and she did say that she felt okay, but she just couldn't maintain it. She felt like she couldn't go out to restaurants with her family or her friends, and she ended up just binging on all of the things that she cut out. And she had a very poor relationship with those foods afterwards. Whenever she ate them, a lot of guilt, a lot of shame kind of coming up with them. So we had a lot of work to do. So what we did, usually when I work with clients, the first 4 to 6 weeks is all about working on that blood sugar piece. So coming back, making sure our meals are nice and balanced, that we're eating enough protein. And yes, in some cases, maybe we are doing a little bit of tracking to see where we stand. and maybe need to make a little bit of adjustments there. We also with her did a little bit like increased her meals, so had those larger meals that we talked about, and then her last meal was just a little bit lower in carbohydrates. We aim to have her carbohydrates around the earlier part of the day and also around her exercise when her body was a little bit more primed to manage the glucose from those carbohydrates. Second step that we did was we did a more customized healing gut protocol. So I'll show you kind of what came up on some labs for her, but she had some bacterial overgrowth, had low beneficial bacteria, and some other digestive issues going on there. So we did a customized gut healing protocol kind of as our second phase. And then the last piece was really working on cortisol levels and the relationship to food. So we really worked on that blood sugar piece again, walking outside, making sure that our sleep was dialed in, having some wind down routines, looking at limiting screen time before bed. This is kind of what came up on one of her functional tests. This is a GI map, so it's actually a stool test that gives a pretty comprehensive overview of what's going on in the gut. Sometimes digestive issues can be a little bit hard to navigate as a practitioner because it's hard to know exactly what's going on. We can go off symptoms, but this gives us a little bit more information here. So this first part here, so this is dysbiotic and overgrowth bacteria, quote unquote, bad bugs. So we can see she had a few strains that were quite high, which can lead to a lot of gas and bloating and just inflammation and feeling quite uncomfortable. These ones here were her beneficial bacteria. So you can also see some pretty low overall. Her diversity in her gut was quite off. So she had overgrowth of bad bacteria, not enough good bacteria. We want actually the opposite. We want lots of good, robust bacteria, not a lot of opportunistic bacteria. Other things that came up, she had a couple of health markers on there. She had high levels of fat in her stool and also just wasn't breaking down protein properly. So we really looked at making sure she had enough digestive fire, that she had enough acidity to break down food. We added in some good probiotics and did a bit of a protocol to get rid of some of these guys and just kind of overall optimize her digestive health. Really, again, really important just for overall metabolic health. Sometimes we can just focus on healing the gut and it can directly influence our weight at the same time. So 4 months is kind of the sweet spot. I've actually just changed my program offerings to just one program that is a 4-month program. So after I worked with her, she lost 25 pounds. We were right on target. It was about 1.5 pounds per week. Her sugar cravings went down, carb cravings went down, bloating significantly reduced. And one of the things that she wanted was just to have more energy to keep up with her kids and go for hikes and bike rides. And so she felt like she was able to do that. And then also a really big wing was just that not so fearful of food. That's probably one of my favorite kind of feedback after working with clients is just not having that fear around food. I think especially for women, one of my favorite quotes was that women are taught how to diet, we're not how to nourish. And so sometimes when we flip the switch and focus on nourishing our body and supporting our body versus restriction, then everything changes. Okay, so I'm just going to wrap up and I am just going to share. I know I've been talking a lot. It's like Black Friday, Cyber Monday week. Everybody's, got their things going on. I do have a couple of promotions that I'm going to continue through until Friday. So one of them being in my program, usually doing one of those functional tests of the GI map, which is a stool test. The other one I offer is a Dutch complete hormone test. So if you are somebody that feels like you're struggling with your hormones, maybe you're burnt out, maybe struggling with things around your cycle, lots of PMS, or maybe feel like your hormones are influencing your metabolic health, then that might be a good one to look at. Or the GI map would be if you are someone struggling with a lot of gas, bloating, loose stools, constipation, heartburn, those sorts of things. And that kind of lets us see what's going on under the hood, so to speak. So these are actually complementary with that 4-month program. Usually it's an additional, these tests can be quite expensive. They're almost $600. So I'm actually offering these for free. Or the other option too, if you're like, I don't know if I really need those, but I need some extra support, then instead of paying 4 months of coaching, then you pay for 3 months of coaching. So I'll share all those details there again when I send out the follow-up email. But that concludes our session for today. So I did want to open up. I don't know if either think we only have a couple people hanging out here, but I don't know if either of you had any questions or not. You feel free to pop on or throw it in the chat box if you like, or if it comes up afterwards, you can always send me an email at the same time too. So, no. Fun. Is there a difference between CRP and high sensitive CRP? Not that I know of. That's a good question. I've only seen the CRP, not the high sensitivity. To be honest, I don't know what the difference is. I can kind of look that up maybe afterwards and let you know a bit more. But I've just seen the one. So that's a good question. I don't know. Yeah, so for vitamin D, the reference range, I just have to double check. I don't have it memorized offhand. For ferritin, kind of the reference range is around 30 upwards to like 250. Ideally, for women, you want to be somewhere between 70 and 100. I see a lot of women who are just kind of like a few points out from being deficient. So really, really like that's a big one to pay attention to and make sure um that your ferritin levels and your iron levels are up. So something that I see with iron is especially with women, I don't know if it's because there's some stigma maybe around red meat being a little bit higher in calories and higher in fat and only having it a couple of times per week. Sometimes women are only having it around their cycle, but I do think having quality like red meat in the diet a couple times a week is good. And then the other side is that if we're breaking it down and absorbing it. So if there are any digestive issues and we're not absorbing nutrients, then that's something that needs to be looked at. Maybe you're eating enough or even taking a supplement, and sometimes the iron stores aren't going up, then you want to look at what's going on with digestion. So, kind of the optimal range for vitamin D somewhere between 75 to 125 for vitamin D. Vitamin D, for supplementing with that, what I usually like is a liquid vitamin D combined with K2. I find liquids absorbed a little bit better. Um, And then you want to have that with a meal. I like vitamin D earlier in the day. So, usually with breakfast, you need to have some fat in there and just to help with absorption too. And then, usually, around 4,000 IUs is generally safe for most people. But again, if you are deficient, then maybe you need to top it up. Uh, is it possible to have allergies and concerned about gut health, but not have digestive issues or bowel issues, but still needing a GI map? And what is your take on hormone replacement therapy? I'll answer the last one first. So the hormone replacement therapy, there's actually been a lot of research that has been come out, especially in regards to estrogen, and that it is fairly safe. And same with progesterone. So I do think for women, kind of if you are struggling with symptoms in perimenopause or menopause, or even not. Like sometimes I have women on hormone, not me personally, but I've seen women on hormone replacement therapy, especially if they struggle with things like PMS or PMDD or very, very low mood before their cycle because of low progesterone. But I think it can be really, really helpful for women. So in that case, I would probably, I don't know if you have a naturopath or somebody that you're working with, but that would be the best person to work with. I do know some GPs, general practitioners do hormone replacement therapy. I know naturopaths do the bioidentical hormone replacement therapy. I don't really know, to be honest, if you go to your doctor, what if it's a more synthetic version that they look at there, but I do think it can be beneficial. And then to your other question, is it possible to have allergies and concerned about gut health but not having digestive issues? Yeah, that's going to depend. I mean, our gut, it kind of, I call it the mother of the body. So if she's off, then other things can be off. So if even somebody is struggling with like skin issues, acne or eczema, or a lot of brain fog or hormonal issues, it's all interconnected too. So I'm kind of like, when in doubt, look at what's going on in the gut. As far as allergies go, I'm not sure if you're maybe referencing to doing like maybe a food sensitivity test. Those, unless you're doing like a gut healing protocol, I don't know if there's a ton of benefit. It might be more beneficial just to really look at limiting things like gluten sometimes, in some cases, if you're doing a gut healing protocol, is good to eliminate alcohol, excess sugar, any processed foods, gums, and fillers, to just look at eliminating those first. And then you could maybe do some more further detective work if you still feel like things are a little bit off too. But yeah, but good questions there. Oh, good. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Yeah. So again, I got the recording, so I'll send that out and I'll make sure I send the slides. So if there's anything that you want to come back to or look for, more than welcome to do that. And any questions, just send me an email and I'm happy to help. And yeah, and I have a couple other things, and I'll send some supplements, and I'll see if I have any other resources that are forward along. But I appreciate you guys joining me tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening, and I'll talk to you soon. Okay, take care.